Today, we're going to be exploring one of my favorite aspects of the Rosicrucian tradition. And this is these are the Vestals and the Colombes who serve in our Rosicrucian temples. Colombes are girls and young women in the Rosicrucian tradition between 10 and 18 years of age who serve in our lodge and chapter temples in a ritualistic role. And then for women who are older than that, they have a very similar role, but they're called Vestals. So between 10 and 18 years of age, the girls and young women are called Colombes, and when they serve when they're older, they're called the Vestal. And these positions are based on the role that existed in ancient Rome in the temple of Vesta. There was a deity, a goddess named Vesta. Hestia was a Greek goddess who had a similar role, and she predated Vesta. In the earliest times, Vesta wasn't shown as a person, but was shown as a flame. She was the flame. The Vestals took care of the hearth, which was considered to be the gateway between worlds. This was the place where the divine world and our world merged. Vestals had a very important role in Roman spiritual life for hundreds of years. And each Vestal served for 30 years. Once they committed to serve, they had to serve the entire 30 years. The first 10 years, they participated in training. And then the next 10 years, they served in the temple. And in the last 10 years, they trained others who succeeded them. The Vestals were the most revered women in ancient Rome. And this was during a period when women had very few rights. Women were legally the property of their husbands, and before that, they had been the property of their fathers. They were much like slaves. However, the Vestals had extraordinary rights, including along with their duties. Only 6 Vestals served at one time. Hold on here. This is an ancient statue of a Vestal who served in Rome. And today this statue is in the Forum in Rome. So usually temples in ancient Rome were rectangular, but in the case of the temples of Vesta, they were circular. And the circle is often associated with the divine feminine and eternal life. Just above the temple of Vesta, still today, this photo was taken during the Amorc World Convention in Rome 2 years ago. And this is a view from what was called the House of the Vestals. And this was a 50-room building where the Vestals lived, and those who helped take care of them and serve them lived as well. And here are a few views today. There are roses in this garden at the bottom of the House of the Vestals. And all of these statues here are statues of actual women who served as Vestals in ancient Rome. And again, here is the Temple of Vesta, which is at the end of what we were just looking at. And this is the House of the Vestals that's up above that area. These girls and women had an extraordinary opportunity, but more than that, they had an extraordinary duty. It was believed that the existence of Rome depended on the eternal flame, which they always tended and kept burning. And they were responsible for keeping the hearth, the eternal flame, alive. If we imagine the time when early nomadic people may have first settled in a cave or a hut, we can see that the hearth, meaning having a fire within their home, would mean everything to them. They couldn't turn on a heater or a stove like we do today. So for ancient people who first had a hearth, who went into a cave or a hut and established a hearth, this meant life for them. It brought light and warmth into their homes. And this was the beginning of the hearth, of having a place of fire in the earliest homes. And often at that time, it was very challenging to start a fire. Now, this developed as communities grew. There would be a central hearth. And if you joined that community, you would get the fire for your hearth from that central hearth, and you'd bring it to your home. It's hard to imagine that, but there wouldn't be an easy way to bring fire into your home otherwise. So a central hearth was always kept burning. And eventually this became a way to connect you with your community and your republic or empire. Again, Rome depended on this eternal flame to be ever burning. At the 2015 AMWORK World Convention in San Jose, Frater Atsushi Hanja, who's the Grand Master of the Japanese Grand Lodge, he presented a fascinating program on the Ainu indigenous people of Japan. And their ancestors were originally part of the Cave Bear clan. This is an image of one of their traditional homes today. In their traditional homes, there is a big square hearth in the center with an eternal flame. And this is the place where the spirit beings enter our world. For the Ainu, when someone in their family went through transition, it's believed that their soul went through this hearth, this square hearth that you see in the center of the room. And they believed that they could communicate with their ancestors through this hearth. The Ainu goddess of the hearth was named Kamui Fuchi, and her name means rising fire sparks woman. She is the goddess who is the caretaker of the sacred flame. She's the keeper of the world between humans and spiritual beings. So her presence, she was very present in the hearth in their home. Often the hearth is associated with the threshold. And you may have heard of the tradition after a wedding where a groom picks up the bride and carries her across the threshold into their new home. Originally, this was to invoke the blessings of the divine fire that existed within the hearth of their home or on the threshold. There are other traditions that tell us the story of a goddess of the hearth or fire, such as the myth of Demeter and her daughter Persephone. And here they are. This is the story in ancient Greece of Demeter, the mother, and her daughter Persephone. And the ancient Greeks believed that when humans died, they did not have a soul like we think of a soul. Instead, their deities lived forever, but regular humans like us, we kind of had a phantom-like soul that lived in the other underworld. And one version of the myth of Demeter and Persephone says that Persephone, a goddess, traveled to Hades, who was the name of a god, but was also the name of the underworld, that she traveled to Hades in order to comfort the people who had died and were existing in the underworld. The more well-known story says that Hades, the deity, abducted beautiful Persephone. He kidnapped her and required her to live in the underworld. In any case, Persephone was in the underworld, and her mother Demeter didn't know where she was. And she was so distraught. She went all over earth trying to find her daughter. And this image just really touches me. This is Demeter doing everything she can to find her missing daughter. And eventually, Demeter went to the town of Eleusis, which is about 12 miles from Athens. And she disguised herself as an old woman, not as the goddess that she was, but as an old woman. And while she was there, the three daughters of the king of Eleusis had compassion for Demeter. They didn't know she was a goddess, and they invited her into their home. And this is an image of Demeter on the right with their mother, the queen of Eleusis, on the left. And in some versions of the story, it says that the daughters thought it would be a good idea for Demeter to take care of their little brother, who was named Demophoon. And in other stories, it says that was the king of Eleusis who entrusted the care of his son to Demeter. In any case, Demeter took care of the boy, and every night she would cover him with ambrosia, which, as you probably know, was considered to be the food or the nectar of the deities in ancient Greece. She would cover him in ambrosia and put him in the divine fire. This was to make him immortal. Humans can't stand being in direct contact with the divine or the divine fire. That's why Demeter covered him with ambrosia so that he could live on forever. And one night, the queen walked in and she saw Demeter doing this, and she screamed. And Demeter took the child out of the fire. And since the process wasn't completed, Demophoon was not made to be immortal. And Demeter said to the queen, she said, "Witless are you mortals. You don't know the difference between good and bad." And again, then Demophoon was not made immortal. Something similar happened to Achilles. You may be familiar with Achilles and his vulnerable Achilles heel. In one version of the story, Achilles' mother held him by the heel and dipped him in the river Styx in order to make him immortal. And she was a nymph, and he was human. And so she put him in, or he was half human. And she put him in the river Styx so that he could become immortal. And where her fingers held him on his heel, that part wasn't protected. The classic story, though, is that she covered him with ambrosia and placed him in a fire. But there was one place that it wasn't reached, and this was in his heel. In any case, it's telling the story of the place where he is vulnerable. The ancient Egyptian goddess Isis did something similar with a child. She covered the child with nectar, which is the Egyptian version of ambrosia, and it confers immortality. And she did this to make this child, this human child, immortal, and she placed the child in the sacred flame. Again, humans can't stand direct contact with the divine or with the divine flame. There, in these ancient stories, it tells that we need some kind of protection, whether it's nectar or ambrosia or something, so that we can withstand the intense energy. Now, alchemy also uses fire in a similar way as a primary agent of transformation. This is a painting by H. Spencer Lewis, which is at Rosicrucian Park, and you can see the alchemical furnace there with the flame. In alchemy, the sacred flame burns away the dross and reveals the hidden essences. Now, for Rosicrucians, we know that this can be working in the laboratory, that kind of alchemy. But more than that, for Rosicrucians, alchemy is spiritual alchemy, where through test of fire, we refine our less refined characteristics. In Hinduism, the most powerful goddess of all is Shakti, and this is Shakti here. She is radiance. She is the light of creation, the Hindu mother goddess. The word that perfectly describes Shakti is power. She is the power of creation, beyond the physical, and the universal source of energy and creativity. In Kabbalah, which, as many of you know, as the esoteric teachings of Judaism, the word Shekinah means dwell, and refers to the divine presence dwelling in our midst. We often refer to the altar that is in the center of a Rosicrucian lodge or chapter temple as the Shekinah. And this is the altar in the center of the Grand Temple at Rosicrucian Park. However, the Shekinah is actually not the altar or the 3 candles that you see on the altar. It is the receptive space just above the candles. The Jewish tradition has many different names for the divine. Most of them are masculine. However, Shekinah is feminine, and it's a feminine name for the divine, and it is this receptive holding place just above the candles. It's where the divine dwells, where the sacred flame exists among us. People in the Zoroastrian tradition pray towards a flame. They believe that fire represents the light of the divine. They also believe that there is a spiritual flame within us, which is fed through our pure thoughts and pure acts. And this is similar to the training for our Colombes and our Vestals. How do you prepare to be the caretaker of the hearth where the sacred flame lives? How do you approach this place? The Doric stand in our lodge and chapter temples is our hearth. And this is the Doric stand in the Grand Temple. It's a flame in the east of the temple. The Colombe or the Vestal sits right next to this during our rituals and tends it. At the beginning of every convocation, the Colombe takes the light from this hearth and lights the 3 candles on the Shekinah in the center of the temple. This activates the Shekinah, that divine feminine energy in our midst. Again, the word Shekinah means dwell, and it's this divine presence dwelling in our midst. Some Colombes prepare for their important role by prescribing a character for themselves before they approach the hearth, when they enter the temple. They enter in reverence. They are very particular about what thoughts they allow into their minds, and are very careful with their words and actions. In one of our initiations, we learned that the Colombe represents our conscience. This reminds us of how we can act when we are in the presence of a divine flame, which of course is ever burning within us. Now, let's practice a meditation together. Please close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths, becoming more relaxed with each exhalation. Imagine that you are in a Rosicrucian temple. This image is the entrance to the grand temple. And here we are before the Shekinah. See the Colombe rise from her seat and light her candle from the flame on the Doric stand, which is next to her. Visualize her walking reverently toward the altar in the center of the temple. She approaches the Shekinah, the altar here, and lights the 3 candles on the altar, activating the energy of the Shekinah just above them. The divine presence dwells in our midst. Just as the Shekinah is at the heart of the temple, attune the energy of your heart with the Shekinah. Connect your heart with the light in this temple. Feel your heart center vibrating with this energy. See a yellow radiance extending from your heart center throughout your entire being. Your heart, your being, is gently enfolded in hands above the candles on the altar. You exist in the Shekinah. You exist in this place where the divine feminine dwells. Now let's intone the vowel sound A 7 times. A, it's spelled E-H, and it sounds like the letter A. And while you do this, feel your heart center growing stronger, more radiant, and extending throughout your entire being. Ready? Inhale. Hey.
The flame dwells within your heart. So mote it be. May we ever be aware of the sacred flame with which we have been entrusted.